Good morning, party people, and welcome to office hours in Grimsey, Iceland. The noise that you hear, which will be coming and going from time to time, are Arctic terns. There are these really aggressive little birds near the Arctic Circle. They're probably elsewhere too. But when you walk around this island, you have to carry a stick and you have to hold the stick way above your head so that when these birds are dive bombing you, they stop at the stick instead of hitting you on the head. So from time to time in the video, you may see them fly in. I'm at one of the quieter places on the island. This is a tiny little island only inhabited by about 100 people during the summer and about 20 people during the winter. It's actually nice here in the summer. This is right at the end of July. It's been nice. I don't want to say t-shirt and shorts weather, but pretty close to it. Right on the edge of the Arctic Circle, there's a stone that marks the Arctic Circle about a half-hour hike from here. Erica and I did that yesterday. I didn't think to film an office hours there because we were late for dinner. But lots of seabirds here on the island. There are puffins over here, and you'll probably see them come and go at some point throughout the video because if they get spooked, they all fly off en masse and just take off. So let's get to some of your highly voted questions. Let's see the number one question, the one that y'all upvoted the most. We have a one. Wow, I'm going to have to. These are old prescription glasses. I can't quite make out the iPad. Woo! We have a 1.5 terabyte Azure SQL DB. This is Standa asking. A 1.5 terabyte Azure SQL DB. Developers introducing non-indexed queries can put a huge strain on the database. Okay, hold on. Let me kind of stop you right there for a second. I hear often database administrators getting really angry and controversial with developers, like developers are the enemy. But at the end of the day, developers are the ones who get us paid. Customers don't pay people because, oh my, you got such a great database administrator. They pay you because they've got a working application, and lots of people like to use the application. Now, there's a little bit of us versus them in there, developers introducing non-indexed queries. I tell you what, when I work with developers, I tell them all I want you to do is put a clustered index on the table, and that's it. Just a clustered index. Don't try to guess what the right non-clustered index is. Just ship it out, because non-clustered indexes are easy to fix in post. Like, we can always go back and add those really easily later. And with developers, I don't want them indexing every single query, because then you have the opposite problem. Then you have so many indexes that you have problems doing inserts, updates, and deletes because things take so long. I only want my developers putting in clustered indexes because we don't know which queries are going to be popular. So hold off on indexing everything until you actually know that it's popular. People want to put in a feature in the app that does one or two one-off queries. I'm kind of okay with that. So the next part of the question was, do you recommend alerting on the database to proactively identify resource-intensive queries, like querying Query Store or Blitz Cache periodically? So you always want this, even if the application is stable. I know your question was about developers are shipping new things all the time, but you even want this when the application is stable, because you can have things where a query will go out of control due to data changes, like people have been inserting, updating, and deleting, and now a query that used to run quickly now suddenly runs slowly. So yes, absolutely, I recommend monitoring for the most resource-intensive queries. I tend to focus on using the plan cache because it's already built in. It doesn't require any additional overhead. It just works instantly out of the box. It misses some things, but of course, then again, so does every approach. Query Store misses some kinds of queries. Monitoring tools miss some kinds of queries. But absolutely, I recommend you using something. Which specific ones I use, we teach in my mastering classes. All right, next up, Olin asks, what's the best approach to setting max server memory on a SQL Server instance? I've seen your posts suggesting that about 10% of RAM should be left available to the OS, but how can it be determined if 10% is too little or too much? I'm still I'm still seeing the cache cleared out when following that figure. Well, if you're seeing, when you say you see the cache cleared out, what I'm betting that you mean is you mean that page life expectancy plummets from time to time. Page life expectancy is a BS measure that measures how many seconds a page stays in memory from the time that SQL Server reads it up off of disk to put it in cache. How long in seconds does it stay? Looks like I'm doing this. How many seconds does it stay in cache before we've had to flush it out to go on and read something else? That's a BS metric. It sucks for all kinds of reasons. The thing that I would focus on instead is, what's your SQL Server's top wait type? That will tell you way more about where the bottleneck is, because it can be harmless that you're having a page life expectancy completely crash. It may not be the biggest problem on your server. CPU, for example, may be a much larger problem. Now, having said that, if I found that memory was an issue, what I go track down is, what are the top memory consumers? Is it the buffer pool? Is it query workspace memory? Because queries are firing up and asking for really large memory grants. And I'll give you the classic examples that by default, one query can grab 25% of the SQL Server's RAM. If one query grabs 25% of your RAM, page life expectancy is going to plummet, especially when multiples of those queries are run at the same exact time. And it's not going to matter whether you set max server memory at 80%, 90%, or 95%. It's not going to matter, because those 2 or 3 queries that are running are still going to decimate the entire server. So to make a long story short here, you're going down the wrong rabbit hole of looking at max server memory or page life expectancy. Come back and look at what are the SQL Server's top wait types and what you can do in order to reduce those top wait types. And of course, I teach you those processes in my classes as well. It's just funny that the top 2 both relate to my training classes. I find this all the time, that people go, oh, you know, I've got all this experience and I feel like I'm working really hard, but I'm just missing this one thing. And then when you come to the training class, you go, oh, I was missing everything. Just because you were doing something for 10 years doesn't mean that you're good at it. You got to get yourself some training. All right, next up, Standa asks again. Oh, Standa has like 5 of them in here, so I'm only gonna hit one more of these, and then I'll erase Standa's. But these are the top high voted ones. Standa asks, what amount free space in buffer pool pages do you consider acceptable? We're observing 33 to 35% free space there, and it seems like a lot, leaving that much RAM on the table. It is, especially given that a lot of times folks focus on how can I get the most bang for the buck out of my memory. I don't want any free space available on my data pages up in RAM. I've seen a lot of amateur hour database administrators say, well, I set fill factor lower, set it down from 100%, that's no good, it causes page splits. I set it lower in order to reduce page splits. What they're really doing is they're setting fragmentation. Because if you set fill factor, instead of 100%, you set it down at, say, 80%, what you're telling SQL Server is, I want to leave 20% empty on every page in RAM. Whenever we're rebuilding indexes, we're making sure that they have 20% empty space. You just cut your RAM by 20%. Now, when I see not when I see, but when you see 30 to 35% free space available inside the buffer pool, what that makes me think is that either someone set fill factor really low, like say 70%, and they're causing it because they're leaving all these empty pages, or we have an issue where we actually do need to rebuild our indexes due to internal fragmentation. If you search on YouTube for Brent Ozar fragmentation, I've got a video on why defragmenting your indexes isn't helping. Go watch that. It's about an hour long. It comes up often in these kinds of video streams. Go watch that one, Brent Ozar, why defragmenting your indexes isn't helping. And that will, if the problem is that you've got fill factor high, but you're still seeing those empty space, then you do need to rebuild your indexes. And I go into that in the video. Next up, James asks, I have an old third-party database. Is it old, dirty third-party database? with all strings defined as varchar. The software that's querying this database has its strings defined as nvarchar. No! As a result, none of the indexes on these values are working. I can't change the definitions in the database or in code. Is there any hope? Okay, so the problem with this is obviously implicit conversion. When you pass in a high fidelity data type and you compare it to a low fidelity data type, like from nvarchar to varchar. Oh, I hear a bunch. Oh, there's so many puffins out today. It's just beautiful. So when you compare a high fidelity data type variable or parameter down to a low fidelity data type in the table, like varchar, what are the ways to fix this? Okay, you can fix the code. You said it's an old third-party database and you can't do that. You can add indexed computed columns. You can add columns that cast that data type up to an nvarchar, but often with third-party databases, we're not allowed to alter the tables. Another trick is to use indexed views. If you're running on Enterprise Edition, this is an Enterprise Edition only trick, but if you're running on Enterprise Edition, you can create indexed views on top of those tables that have the casts in them, and then index those indexed views, or when you create the unique clustered index on the indexed view, you define it on the column that you're trying to search for. That can actually do the same thing as using an indexed computed column. And now, it's tough for me to do justice to this inside a YouTube video. Hopefully you're able to follow that just from the explanation that I gave there. I spend about 20 to 30 minutes on it with demos in my Mastering Index Tuning class. But if you recognize those words, that might be enough to get you across the finish line. Works in third-party databases, the gotcha, of course, being Enterprise Edition only. All right, let's see here. Let's say, next up, Anonymous says, how do you organize, oh, this is kind of, it's not technical. I'll take it anyway since I started reading it. How do you organize your life and lists of things to stay so productive? And then second part, how do you manage your mental state for productivity? Okay, so the first part is the list. I am a huge believer in the philosophy of David Allen's getting things done. Which anytime you hear productivity, you're like, oh God, productivity, work smarter, not harder. Here's for me was the real breakthrough moment. Work is always going to ask for more stuff than I have time to do. It's just always going to happen. There's no way you can get around it. So I time box the times when I do work are these hours right here. And when I walk out of that office, which of course these days we're not really doing offices, but when I walk out of that time box, whatever that time box was, I'm done. So the things that I need to do inside that time box, I'll make lists and I'll resort them. But I got to know that whenever I walk out of the office I'm going to pretend like it's 9 to 5. When I walk out of the office at 5 o'clock, whatever I was done doing was the most important things that I could have done with my time during that window. It's really hard to walk away at, I'm going to use the old example again, 5 p.m., but you got to find the hours that work best for you for work. And at the end of that, you got to walk away because you have work that your family needs you to do to stay upbeat, to stay positive, to enrich their lives, take them on vacations, whatever. So I use Remember the Milk, which is a web-based task management type thing where I can put in all the stuff that I need to do. And then when I sit down at the keyboard at whatever time it is that I want to go to work, then during that time, I know I'm working through those. I'll spend several minutes looking through to prioritize them and make sure that I do the most important things first. Second part of that was how do I manage my mental state for productivity? Years ago, I went through an exercise, and I wish I could find the source of this, but you would take a piece of paper, a paper notebook, and you would write down columns for how good do I feel from like 1 to 5, how productive do I feel, like do I feel like getting work done from 1 to 5, and how energetic do I feel like from 1 to 5. And the columns might have been slightly different than that. But then you set yourself a timer every hour, and every hour you would stop and you would write in and rate yourself from 1 to 5. The idea was, after doing this for like 1 or 2 weeks, you get a really clear picture for when you work well. Because some people they feel energetic and positive at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Some people really love working overnight to music or when everyone else has gone to bed. Some people love to work I get up at 3 or 4 a.m. I can't stop myself. It's just always been like that. I get up at 3, 4, 5 a.m. And during that time, I'm really energetic. Even without coffee, I'm like, let's get all kinds of stuff done. So for me, I time box my work. It's from the time that I get up until about 9 or 10 a.m., which is whenever Erica gets up. And that's when I go and do the things that I want to go do, like stuff like this that I can't do in the afternoon, because in the afternoon I'm just dead. I have no interest in doing any work whatsoever. I take naps from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. I've given up fighting it. I've always been that way too. For like the last 10 years, I've taken naps as often as I can between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. Hopefully that answers that one. All right, let's see. Next up, we have John asks, can you explain why too many indexes can give bad performance on selects, even if the select doesn't use the index? So there are a bunch of things that can cause this. One of the things that hits a lot is statistics, where SQL Server will use, whenever you create indexes, SQL Server also creates statistics on exactly the same column. And SQL Server will infer things based off of those statistics, and SQL Server may think that a query is going to produce a certain number of rows, when in reality it's going to produce much more or much less. The more data that SQL Server has, the faster query plans will go if that data is accurate. And often it's not. Often people are just hitting create index, and then they're not paying attention to what happens afterwards, like how statistics are updated on those objects. Or they'll do things like updating statistics, and they won't notice that you're getting sampling with a very low number of rows. So as a result, SQL Server will have a lot of data, but a lot of it is inaccurate and doesn't accurately describe the contents of your tables. That's one way that it can do it. Another way that it can do it is it can increase compilation time. The more choices that SQL Server has on the same table for the routes that make sense for this query, the longer it can take to compile the query plan. Depending on parameter sniffing, SQL Server may sniff a parameter where one set of indexes work well, and then the next time you run it, you're running it with a different parameter, so a different set of indexes work better. So sometimes taking away choices from SQL Server will get more consistent, good execution plans for everyone. There are all kinds of ways that it can happen. All right, next up, let's see. Mike says, a new client of mine informed me that they're moving away from stored procedures over to app-generated queries. I know this is wrong. No, you're wrong. Is this a new direction? If not, let me know sources where I can convince them otherwise. Okay, so this is one of those instances. This is one of those instances where on the live feeds I always say, instead of saying that something is wrong, always say, a friend of mine said that this is wrong. So that way, when you're wrong, you don't look so bad. And in this case, unfortunately, Mike, you look bad. I didn't use your last name. See, I didn't use your last name. It's your friend Mike. It's the other Mike. So here's the deal. You got two choices on where to put your queries. You can either put them in stored procedures, or you can put them in the app. And when I say put them in the app, I don't care whether it's Entity Framework, Link to SQL, and Hibernate, Dapper, whatever, but the T-SQL that's built inside the app. So the T-SQL queries either come from stored procedures or from the app. If they come from stored procedures, the good part is, or the benefits of that, is that if you have a lot of database administrators with a lot of time on their hands, they can tune them without having to redeploy the application. The database administrators can quickly reshape those, rewrite them, check them into source control, whatever. Now, the drawback of that, though, is deployment is terrible when you're trying to deploy a whole new set of changes to the application, and you also want to make sure that the changes make it to the database in the right way. So now your developers have to manage deployment changes across both their code and their database, which can be a little bit of a pain in the rear. It can be a huge, massive pain in the rear. Another drawback with this is you actually have to have a lot of database administrators with a lot of time on their hands, and often we don't. So the other alternative, putting the queries inside the application. This makes for easier deployment, because whenever you deploy the application, you deploy the brand new set of queries. If you have a lot of developers, it's easy for them to review the code and make sure that it's working as intended. Now, it's hard to modify performance of that code. That's the drawback, is that if Entity Framework or Dapper or Hibernate, whatever, chose a bad query, it's hard to modify that. But you know what? If you have a lot of developers and you don't have a lot of database administrators, I have more faith in Entity Framework and Hibernate Dapper building a better query than I do a bunch of untrained developers. Because what I've seen happen with, not you, Mike, but that friend of yours, the other Mike, I've seen the other friend of yours, Mike, roll in and go, "Oh my God, we have all this code inside the application. That's got to go. From now on, we're putting every single query inside stored procedures. No arguments." And then you take a bunch of developers who've never written stored procedures before, you drop them into SSMS or Visual Studio Code or Azure Data Studio, and you have them start writing stored procedures, and the performance is terrible. Because if you don't know what you're doing, it's not like you're going to produce better code than Entity Framework or Hibernate or Dapper did. So that for me is the basic judgment point. If you have a whole lot of developers and not DBAs, keep the queries in the code. If you have a whole bunch of DBAs with time on their hands who are good at performance tuning, then sure, you can put the code inside stored procedures and you can tune it quickly there without having to redeploy the application. All right, next up, Vegas DBA says, "You just started a new job." The hell I did. I quit. Everything is still on SQL Server 2008 R2. Every user is a sysadmin. Many SSIS jobs are launching files with plain text credibilities. SQL Blitz returns at least 250 rows in every instance. There's no monitoring. What do you prioritize to begin modernizing? Search for Brent Ozar, period, stop. Search for Brent Ozar, hierarchy of database needs. Brent Ozar, hierarchy of database needs. And what this is it's a plan that I built that explains what you should focus on first. Number one, by far and away, is backups. Make sure that your data is backed up, can be restored, and that the restores are free from corruption. That's like safety, bottom line stakes. Everybody's absolutely positively got to start there. Then the hierarchy of needs goes up from there. It's like a pyramid. It's like a pyramid scheme. It goes up from there, explaining what to focus on. And future-proofing is actually the last thing in the list, because you got to make sure that things are secure first as well. So that's where I would start, is just backups. Because so often people are like, well, I think they're all okay. You know, I'm not getting any errors. And then you hit database corruption or ransomware now these days, and you're absolutely screwed. Next up, Eric says, "Hi, Brent. We've been getting deadlocks recently, and they seem to be coming in on the same 6 or 8 tables. I have some monitoring in place, and I get notified of the event and the deadlock. Loser. I'm a loser, baby. Is there any way to find the winner of the deadlock?" Yeah, SP Blitzlock. SP Blitzlock. All right, going on. Look, they can't all be long-winded answers. Next up, Drew asks, "Any recommendations or advice for those of us inheriting less than desirable environments where best practices are few and far between? The gulf from current and desirable state can seem so wide." So that, I would say the same thing. Brent Ozar's hierarchy of needs to tell you what to focus on first. SQL Server, next up, Asim. So the next highest voted question, we have one more highly voted question after that, and then we'll call her quits. So Asim says, SQL Server 2017 is using 30% excessive memory over and above the allocated 250 gigs. I know that the max allocation limit is only for the buffer pool, but we're not using .NET CLR, linked servers, extended stored procedures. How do you find what caused that? sysdm os memory clerks. sys.dm underscore os underscore memory underscore clerks. This will tell you what the consumers of memory are. I love this DMV. I hardly ever get to use it, and when I use it, it's just totally a lifesaver. It's a whole lot of fun. But it'll tell you how much in kilobytes is being consumed by different parts of the SQL Server engine. My guess, and this is just a guess, is that it's probably the execution plan cache. 30% seems high, though. So yeah, start there, though. That'll get you the starting point. And then the last one that was highly voted was Martin. Martin says, hi, Brent, we use a lot of temp tables to query out stuff. Oh, Martin, we actually covered this in the last webcast. I think you put it in. He says, should we turn on optimize for ad hoc workloads? No. As we talked about in the last webcast, that is not a good approach for that one. All right, so that is everything. Let's go ahead and clear out the question queue so that we can get rid of those. And I am off to go get some more coffee. I had 1 cup of coffee before I came out here this morning, and that was it. An absolutely beautiful day here. See a little fishing boats going out on the horizon. Our game plan for today, we head out of Grimsey. There's this tiny little island off the North Shore. Has a ferry that comes here. The ferry comes once a day and leaves once a day. And so the ferry leaves at 5 p.m. today. Today we're going to try and walk around. I say we will walk around the whole island. It takes about 4 hours. And carry my trusty stick to fend off the birds here. Erica was joking that we should get one with flashing lights, and we weren't sure if that would attract the birds or make them go away. And we'll take lots of pictures of these puffins. Oh, I should say, too, this video is shot on my phone because I left my camera gear back at the dock. I left my camera gear back over at the dock in Dalvik inside the car. It's not going anywhere. It's locked up safe. But they didn't have enough space on this tiny little ferry. It can basically only take 2 cars each trip. There wasn't any space on the way back. They bring fresh fish back, and tomorrow or today, the day where they're bringing tons of fish back, so we couldn't bring the car with us, which was a bummer because I wanted to say that our Land Rover had been to the Arctic Circle. I figured that would be a lot of fun. But yeah, we'll be out looking at these puffins. I will go, let's go give you a walk over there. I can't switch sides of this camera once it starts filming, so I'm just going to hold it over towards there and see how close we can get y'all to the puffins before we quit. There are several places in Iceland where you can see these puffins. Oh, boy, I got dive bombers here. And the ones here on Grimsey are a little bit more skittish. Like as I walk over, they'll start to bail. So I don't want to disrupt them since they're all just having such a nice quiet time in the morning. But hopefully that'll at least get you a rough idea what this place looks like. And that's Grimsey. So I will see y'all in another office hours. Adios.